The show focused on delivering beneficial information on everything to do with products and services that can improve your life. This is Experts on Call on AM 650.
And welcome back to Quay Pacific's Talk About Strata. I'm Sterling Fox, joined by my co-host Tony Giventu, Executive Director of the Condominium Homeowners Association of British Columbia, and our two guests in studio from Quay Pacific, Dan O'Hearn, the President, and Vice President Barrett Hansen. And the program today, Tony, is dedicated to rentals in strata environments.
It is, and it's kind of a complicated problem, especially for the property managers, because they have to rely on the information provided by the Strata Council and the owners to them to be able to administer the bylaws. And I think one of the biggest complications, and Dan and Barrett, you can certainly comment on this, but one of the biggest complications is just maintaining the inventory. How do you know who rents? What do they do? And I think a lot of strata corporations, a lot of strata councils just want to dump that responsibility onto the manager and just say, you take care of it. We'll deal with the bylaw enforcement stuff, but
right.
How do you manage that?
Well, I mean, it's difficult when people are being secretive because there's some people that aren't too sure, perhaps, whether the bylaw, they would be permitted. So they're going to put a tenant in anyway because they don't want to draw attention to themselves if they're even considering asking. So they may slip a tenant in there. They may feel that it's a family member, a brother or sister, so it's not really tenancy, which is incorrect. I mean, it's still forming a tenancy. It may be this absentee homestay arrangement where it's a roommate, but they're gone for prolonged periods. They've created a tenancy. So, and then you have tenants that maybe haven't filled out Form Ks, which is a requirement, and we're relying on that information to really know who the tenants are. So. That is the challenge in administering when people are being secretive and not complying, with the act. And even if they are allowed to rent, it certainly would benefit the corporation to know who the tenants are, who's actually occupying these spaces there, because we require that. If you're a homeowner and you're buying, you get this Form B. Right. You don't want to, and you think there's 20 rentals, and you find it's actually 3 times that amount. You feel like somebody hasn't complied with the requirements. So. I think it's important that everyone come clean and the legislation is clear and adhere to it.
Barrett, Dan's talking about people being secretive very knowingly, as in this probably happens a fair bit. Do you as property managers encounter fairly frequently situations whereby, gosh, I didn't know that person was renting. I thought they were the owner. Gosh, there's a shock. Does that happen fairly commonly?
Sure it does, and I think that there's certainly an element of secrecy, but I also think that there are times people simply don't know. They haven't taken the time perhaps to become familiar with their bylaws or understanding strata. If they're not, for instance, if they're offshore owners or owners that have not had any experience with strata in the past, they may simply not know. So it's an education part too. And but that in the end of the day, as a managing agent for us, we can only base everything that we do on what we know. Right. And the same with council. They don't always know either. So it can be sometimes an administrative challenge to get an accurate number.
So what happens, Tony, in the case, in this example that I was just talking with Barrett about, where a person kind of quietly sublets or rents their condo out without really telling many people, and surreptitiously move out and new people move in, and Bob's your uncle and off we go. And then sooner or later that the new tenant occupant's presence is detected, and hey, you're not supposed to be there. This is a non-rental area. What happens then?
Well, it's one of the giveaways. I saw this online the other day. Furnished Strata apartment. Furnished Strata apartment. So, let me see. It's a bit of a giveaway. Somebody's trying to sneak a tenant in, that either in violation of a bylaw or under another circumstance. Now, it may be
that's much easier to do if you're not moving furniture,
isn't it? If you're not moving furniture. It may be a situation that it's a building that they are exempt and somebody owns 10 apartments and they've got them all furnished. They're all exempt from the bylaws, and they're renting them on short-term or long-term stays for visitors, guests, holiday goers, vacation rental by owner. Could be things like that. Could be things where they're renting for 3 to 6 month period for working professionals in the city. But check it out, because Furnished Strata apartment is a great way sometimes for strata councils to figure out someone's trying to surreptitiously rent their unit in violation of the bylaws. Right. It's the move in, move out administration in some of these buildings, though, is horrendous. That's one of the huge challenges that we have is whenever tenancies change or transfer, because the Strata Corporation's left with all the problems behind. Strata Corporations adopt move-in, move-out fees with the hope of covering the basic costs of who's getting rid of the garbage that was left behind. What about all the stuff that was dumped in the parking lot, or the 2 extra dumpsters full of equipment? What about the damage to the elevators, the damage to the walls, the front door, the locks? What happened when keys were lost? All of the problems that come with move-ins, move-outs in buildings. It puts a lot of work on the Strata Council and the Strata Manager.
So, Dan, when somebody comes to you, a Strata Council representative comes to you and says, okay, we've got an illegal or unauthorized tenant, whose responsibility is it to deal with that person? The council is the one that wrote the bylaws forbidding or prohibiting such rental, but are they the ones who have to act, or do you as the property manager do the enforcement of the bylaws?
Well, I mean, we're going to do all the legwork, and we're going to take the direction from the council and the corporation. Certainly, the ultimate decisions on what's done and the process is approved through the council. So we're going to always respect that. But I think our knowledge and our expertise, we're bringing to the table some suggestions, right? And landlords have to be aware that if they've snuck a tenant in here and the tenant finds out that there really was no authority for them to be a tenant, they can, if they find this out within 90 days of their tenancy, they can give notice to the landlord to move out, and the landlord's going to be subjected to their moving costs up to the first month or up to 1 month's rent. So the tenant is not at fault, and the tenant can break that lease.
And I wouldn't be surprised if it hasn't happened a few times where guy moves in or people move into a strata, and absolutely all the people who own the place assured us that it's okay to rent. It's absolutely fine, no problem at all. They promised every way till Sunday that we'd be just fine. It's perfectly legal, and of course it isn't. And then you're stuck. You've moved. You've, in good faith, you've uprooted yourself in your life, and now you're in a place where you're not wanted, let alone allowed to be. So there you are, high and dry. Barrett, how do you deal with that as the tenant in this case? Now, Dan said you do have some recourse. Yes. You can get the person who conned you into accepting, into thinking the place was okay when it wasn't, to pay some of your moving expenses.
Yes.
Short of that, what other recourse is there?
Well, it's again, anytime there's something that's going on in Strata Corporation, I think they need to go and look at the bylaws and what the bylaws is. The bylaws is what governs the Strata Corporation.
Right.
But in a case of a tenant, it's unfortunate for a tenant because the tenant will be required to move out.
Right.
And so the only recourse they have is other than obviously to get from the landlord, they entitled to the up to 1 month's rent. As far as moving costs is concerned. But the sad part is the tenant is the one that is the loser in that picture.
No question.
Yeah.
And again, a good faith move in the first place on the assurance that this was all going to be just fine and dandy. So, Tony, what about the owner of that unit that has essentially illegally tried to rent to someone else? And what sort of disciplinary action, if any, is taken against that person who tried to make a few bucks and buck the rules?
Well, the landlord, owner of the unit, is going to be a violation of the rental bylaws, which, by the way, if the bylaws are amended properly, the penalty can be $500 every 7 days.
Oh, okay.
So they could be paying $2,000 a month in penalties. A violation of a rental bylaw is not grounds for the eviction of a tenant by the Strata Corporation. The Strata Corp, that's not part of the penalty. The penalty is not you have to evict the tenant. So in a lot of ways, the tenant's actually in the driver's seat. The landlord now is desperate to get this person out because they're paying pretty big fines.
Sure, exactly.
They're probably paying fines greater than what the rent is every month, right?
Right.
So they're going to be desperate to get the tenant out. So the tenant is very much at the benefit of being able to negotiate with the landlord now. So, but the landlord is going to be paying the bills, and we've seen circumstances where landlords have paid $8,000 or $16,000 of penalties for renting in violation of bylaws. and it's a very real repercussion, and it's an enforceable bylaw.
Right. Now, Dan, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned this very briefly and then moved past it, but I'd like to go back to your point about short-term rentals. So, because the example I was using with Barrett was a person who was moving to a strata. Yeah, this is the new home, and we're going to stay here for a while. What about someone who wants to rent out the strata to business executives who come in for 1, 2, 3-week assignments, or vacationers who are here for a few days? It turns a condominium apartment basically into a hotel unit, and that, I suspect, is quite different from what the intention of the act regarding renting is about.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is a lot of people will be buying into a condominium certainly with the intention of making it their home.
Yeah.
It's a lifestyle choice, and probably aren't too keen on seeing a different couple or group of people going into the unit next door to them endlessly.
Right.
And I think it comes down to the landlords of those units really being respectful of what the intent of the bylaw is, and also understanding they may not be in compliance with local jurisdiction zoning and bylaws too. I mean, once you start getting to daily rentals, you're running a hotel.
Right, exactly.
And it's got a whole different set of issues that opens up. So it's really important that strata corporations, when they create their bylaw, perhaps even elaborate enough that the intention of what they're trying to stop. And you'll see a lot of strata corporations putting in restrictions of, say, a minimum of 90 days, or I've seen as low as a minimum of 1 month. But if you start doing that, then you got a little bit more handle on the situation.
Right.
And you imagine these people coming in for 2 or 3 nights. They would never sign a Form K. That's
Of course not. No.
And so hopefully some of the short stay people too are getting a little bit more sophisticated and understand that they may be coming into an environment that they're not welcome.
Is this fairly common, Tony?
It's
turning a condo into a money-making endeavor.
It's a significant growing complaint, though. The vacation rental by owner situation, it causes security problems for buildings. People lose keys. They you no longer have your network of people who live there who have access to security codes, fobs, cards to buildings. They start going into multiple hands. There are ongoing maintenance issues you have to deal with. There can be safety issues involved with it. Certainly, there are parking problems that occur. We have limited parking in buildings. People bring in rental cars, or they drive into the city. Where are they going to park? And there is less consideration of the neighbors in the building when it comes to behavior by short-term rentals.
Oh, of course.
Right?
Yeah.
They're in, they're out, and so they're not really concerned about making noise, using barbecues at incorrect hours, loud parties. That's the
usual
problem.
Vacation behavior.
Yeah, the usual pets, people, and parking scenario that all result in nuisance complaints. But the short-term rentals also cause a lot of issues. So if there are a lot of short-term rentals, or there are rental pools, we also need to remember that we can be changing the taxation situation of the strata corporation.
Oh, okay.
So if you have rental pools and short-term rentals, and they're actually part of the business of the corporation, those strata lots that engage in those businesses may find that it's going to be necessary for the strata to collect GST on those strata fees, and maintain a separate account for that, because now the units aren't being used for residential purposes.
Right.
They're now being used for
It's a commercial enterprise. Exactly. It's kind of hotelish all of a sudden, isn't it?
It is.
So how about screening? How do strata councils dodge these bullets and screen out potential situations, try to head them off at the pass before they happen?
They don't.
That would be great.
That would be great. Well, you'd almost want, at the very least, a criminal record check sometimes.
Yeah.
But it doesn't happen. The strata corporation cannot screen tenants.
Oh, is that right?
They are not permitted by the Act to screen tenants. The relationship of the tenancy agreement is solely between the owner, the landlord of the property, and the tenants.
Okay.
The strata corporation is not a party to that agreement.
And this gets back to the realization that there's going to be higher and higher occupancy by tenants in strata corporations, especially new ones. And this is important, where there's got to be that collaboration between council and the management. And though the council cannot set up a screening process,
right,
they can certainly offer a lot of assistance to
individual
a landlord, and giving them guidance and recommendations, and put together a package. I mean, we all want the same thing. And I always like our buildings to be like a resort quality, which means if you got a pool table there, there, it doesn't have broken pool cues. It
Right.
has all the balls, right?
Right.
And you have to, people say, well, we don't want the tenants damaging that. Well, the reality is if you maintain that to a great level, you're going to be able to attract tenants that want that and will pay a premium for rent. And you want to be in a building that is so desirable, people will pay a premium for rent. And this is all part of building maintenance and helping you're working with your management company and your landlords to accept and embrace the tenancy and bring them into the community, because you're going to have to.
At CHOA, how much of your time do you spend on a weekly basis, Tony, dealing with landlord tenancy issues within strata environments? Is it a biggie?
It's a significant part of the work. You know, you'd be surprised how many info packs and how many times the information guides on rentals and rental relationships and rentals and insurance are downloaded on a daily basis.
Okay.
So it's a significant issue, and Dan has exactly the right answer. The Strata Council needs to provide landlords with all the information they need so they can do things like tenant verification services, and they can screen their tenants, and they know what the relationships are, how they book use of facilities for move-ins, move-outs. They know what the cost of those things are going to be, and the sequence is clearly laid out so that there aren't any surprises.
Well, and I suppose too, Dan, if all of these protocols are followed, and the owner of the condo is given all of these directions and guidelines and so on, and then even though the council, as you say, isn't allowed to screen anyone, the landlord certainly can,
Yes.
based on the recommendations or guidelines presented by council. So if after all of that learning process and apparently screening process takes place, and you still have conflict issues, Tony, it's definitely between the landlord and the tenant. Where does the council come in, if at all?
Well, if you have conflict issues though with a tenant, for example, bylaw violations, they're almost always nuisance related,
Okay.
noise, something like that. When those issues occur, the tenant and the landlord, the owner of the property, are engaged jointly. You don't deal with just the tenant as the Strata Council. You're dealing with the landlord as well. So when people get notice of a bylaw complaint, it goes to the landlord, it goes to the tenant.
I see, okay.
And they're both brought into the relationship. And if the tenant basically is non-responsive and the Strata continues to fine, and the landlord is ultimately going to be paying the bills for it and paying the cost for the eviction and the damages and all the related problems and all the fines and penalties.
Sure.
And it's an interesting phenomena, though. But as you were talking about the relationship of tenants and buildings and about quality buildings, there are a lot of buildings out there that have absolutely no rental bylaws whatsoever. They don't restrict or prohibit rentals. But you look at the trend, the buildings that are very well maintained, that have good security, that have good operations, they don't have high tenancy rates. People want to live in these buildings. They're good, attractive communities to live in. But we also have buildings that have a lot of tenants that are also excellent communities.
Right.
They're well run, they're well administered. So a lot of it comes down to the organization of the Strata Council and the property manager. Yeah. And if you're well managed and you administer your property well, it doesn't matter whether you have tenants or not. You're going to have a great investment.
Well, I think, and just as we take the break here, Dan, further to your opening point of this conversation, with respect to renters, there's a bit of destigmatization that needs to take place here. Renters get a bad rap in a lot of scenarios, and for good reason. One bad tenant one bad apple, the old cliche, does apply. But renters aren't all bad apples.
No.
And many are incredibly conscientious, upstanding people. So I think it's important to clarify that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, let's take a quick break, and we'll come back with lots more on Quay Pacific's Talk About Strata on AM 650.
Delivering relevant and beneficial consumer information. This is Experts on Call, and there's more still ahead on AM 650.